What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special, and tomorrow is CPI Day. We get the Consumer Price Index for the month of December from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you may notice the BLS snuck this little caveat into their website that says they're going to change the way they measure CPI this month, so we'll see what effect that has on the inflation number. We're also going to get into some recent data and headlines and see if we can't get a good feel for where that number might end up tomorrow. You ready? Hit it. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Gamble, and I'm Nobody Special, and it's that time of the month. We've got our inflation number. The all-important CPI index is going to be released tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S., and the number released tomorrow will be based on December's data, and as we know, there was a lot of changes in December. We had some big drops in energy prices, food prices, vehicle prices. Everything was up in the air. There's also this little caveat has been snuck into the BLS website that shows they're going to be calculating these numbers based on 2019 and 2020 data. And that's important because if you notice, your spending patterns in 2020 were very different than they used to be, weren't they? Also, I just want to remind you guys that I'll be live streaming the CPI release tomorrow morning. I'm going to start at 8:15 a.m. and that number comes out at 8:30. So we will be bringing you that number right as it's released, and we'll dig into the report right away. Hope to see you on that live stream, 8:15 a.m. tomorrow Eastern Time. Now, before we get into the data, folks, I have to ask, could you please like this video, subscribe to my channel? Don't forget that notification bell. It really helps me out, and I'd be forever in your debt. And now it is that wonderful time when we shrink my big, fat melon of a head. And let's look at some of these numbers. Now, first of all, let's revisit the CPI report from November, the number that was released last month in December. And just a reminder, the CPI number in December for the November data was 6.8% year-over-year inflation, and that is with a 0.8% month-over-month change in that number. And just a couple of highlights from here. The biggest changes by far in our last CPI number was definitely energy. Look at that all energy index, 33.3% year-over-year cost in energy. That is a big one. That is all energies. That's your gasoline, oil, natural gas, propane, electricity, all forms of energy. Also making a big dent in the inflation number last month was the prices of new vehicles at 11.1% year over year and used vehicles at 31.4% year over year. Again, those are some very big changes. We're going to look at what those have done. And last but not least, the one that really affects people the most, especially folks in lower income brackets, is the food number. And last month we were at 6.1%. And I want to mention one last thing, and it's a number that is supposed to be a big change, but it has not shown up, and that is the index for shelter, coming in at 3.8% year over year in our last report. And I've been harping on this data point for a long time now because we all know the rent numbers have increased astronomically in the United States last year. And the BLS numbers, or should I say the BS numbers, still say we've only had a 3.8% increase in rent in the last year. And folks, that number is straight up doo-doo. And now there is one very, very big detail I want to draw to your attention, and this is on the bls.gov/CPI website, and that is this little notice here that they have snuck in. Starting in January 2022, weights for the Consumer Price Index will be calculated based on consumer expenditure data from 2019 to 2020. The BLS considered interventions but decided to maintain normal procedures. So what does that mean in plain speak? Well, weighting is very important. For example, the weight of the owner's equivalent rent statistic is about 24% of the whole CPI index. Almost a quarter of the index is based on rent. Well, what they're saying right now is that the Consumer Price Index weightings, the amount that the specific prices count towards the overall average, is going to be based on 2019 and 2020 spending. Now, 2020, you might remember, was something of an unusual year. And what BLS is saying is we are going to use that unusual year to calculate the weightings of all of these statistics. Now, think about that. How much did you go on vacation in 2020? How many times did you stay in a hotel? How many times did you go out to a restaurant? How many times did you go to the doctor in 2020? Our spending was not normal in 2020. It was a crazy, crazy year. And the BLS is going to use our 2020 spending patterns to inform how important each category is in our 2022 CPI numbers. And if history is any guide, every time the BLS changes the way they measure things, it makes inflation seem like less of a problem than it really is. In other words, This little detail that they snuck into the website could cause the CPI number to come in a lot lower than a lot of us are expecting. Poof, inflation problem is solved, right? And if you think I'm kidding, I want you to go to this website. And this is Shadowstatscom. And this is produced by a fellow named John Williams. And what he has done is he has done us the public service of calculating consumer price index consistently using the same methods that were used back in the 1980s. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to this chart here, and that is consumer price inflation from 1980 to the present based on 1980 methodology. If they still calculated CPI the same way they did back in 1980, you notice our inflation would be right now 15%, an all-time high. Okay, so when we hear that we've had the highest inflation reading since 1981 or the highest inflation reading since 2008 or 2007, folks, if you go by a consistent calculation method, we've got the highest inflation reading ever. And with this recent change to the BLS methodology, where they're going to use the 2019 and the 2020 expenditures to inform the weighting of all of these categories in our 2022 inflation numbers, my guess is if any change, this is going to have a big negative change on the index, because there's any number of government expenses, such as cost of living increases for people who are on Social Security or food stamps, that are based on CPI reads. So the government has a financial incentive to underreport CPI, and they've just made a change to how they calculate it. Keep that in mind when these numbers come out tomorrow. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's look at some of the categories. Again, we said food, we said energy, shelter, and used and new vehicles were big changes in the last CPI number. So let's see how those things have changed in the previous month. Let's start with energy. And here we have the price of natural gas. Let's move me out of the way over here. And what I've done on this chart is I put this little bracket. This is the month of December. And as you can see, for natural gas prices, especially after that big decline following Black Friday and the announcement of the new health scare, that natural gas prices were consistently lower for the month of December than they were in the month of November. So although the prices will still be higher than they were in December of 2020, the delta, the change between the two, will be much less than the change was in November. So natural gas as an input to CPI will be lower in the next report. Let's look at crude oil, and again, we get kind of the same thing. This is looking at crude oil prices. There's that big drop off on Black Friday with the announcement of the health scare. And you can see for the whole month of December, oil prices were below where they were in the month of November. So again, we will see a smaller CPI for oil. Now, I want to emphasize we're not going to see negative CPI for oil because oil prices were still higher than they were in December of 2020, but the difference between December prices will be much lower than the difference was in November prices. Again, this is a year-over-year change. Gasoline, same thing. Big drop-off in price starting after Black Friday, and then gasoline prices were lower for the whole month of December versus what they were in November. You will notice, however, that gasoline prices have now recovered, so this will be a short-lived downtick in the energy prices in the CPI. Moving on to the next thing, I want to talk about car prices, because that's been one of the biggest inputs to inflation this year, has been new and used car prices. And just looking at the headline here, this is on kellybluebook.com. Average new car price tops $47,000. Now that might have you thinking the CPI for new car prices is going to come in a lot higher, but we have to look a little bit into the headlines here to see what that really says. So first, let's start off. The average price Americans paid for a new car topped $47,000 for the first time in December. The average final transaction price was $47,077. The figure caps off a year of unprecedented price increases. Now, just reading that, it sure seems like we're going to get a bigger number in December. However, you have to look on what made up those sales. Particularly, you scroll down this article, it says more luxury cars. But prices didn't rise just because of low supplies. Americans bought more luxury cars than they usually do. Now, the way the CPI calculates is they use the same car, the price in November, and then the price in December. So just because people bought more expensive cars doesn't mean CPI is going to tell us the cars got more expensive. And if you look a few paragraphs down, you're going to see that it's actually a different story. The average price paid for a new non-luxury vehicle last month was $43,072, slightly down from the record high set in November of 2021. So month over month, we're actually going to get a negative number for the price of new cars. We'll still get a very big jump year over year when we compare December 2021 to December 2020, but the month over month number will be negative, and thus the year over year number will probably be a lot less than the year over year number in November. However, used cars is a different story. This is looking at the Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index. In particular, we're looking over here on the right-hand side. We've got the 2021 numbers, and we've got the 2020 numbers for the Used Vehicle Value Index. Now, real quick, looking at the November numbers, which is what the December CPI number was based on, you can see we actually had a smaller increase year over year in November than we have for the month of December. So at least according to the Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index, the CPI number year over year and month over month for used cars should come in higher, even though new cars is going to come in a little bit lower. Moving on here to food. Now, the best way I have to gauge food prices is I look at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO.org website, and that gives us the FAO Food Price Index. Now, it's important to note that this is a global index. This doesn't carve out U.S. data, but this is an average of all food prices globally. And if we scroll down here, I want to zoom in a little bit on this chart. This red line here, this is the FAO Food Price Index. Let's get me out of the way here a little bit. And you can see that we actually had a slight downtick in food prices for the month of December. Even though the overall change is still obviously very high, we actually saw a very slight downtick month over month. So what does that mean? We get a negative month over month number for food, but still a positive, albeit lower number year over year for food. And I just want to mention that this little downtick that we saw in December, I do not think changes in the slightest my thesis that in 2022, food prices globally are going much higher because of what's going on in the fertilizer industry. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you know all about that. And we will stay on top of that story as it develops. Lastly, the single most important topic and the single biggest data point in CPI is the rent. And this is where the CPI gets its CPI moniker from, because the rent numbers have been absolute garbage in the CPI for every report for the last 6 months at least. Because as we all know, rent prices have increased astronomically. But go back to the actual CPI numbers, and here you go. They say 3.8% year over year increase in shelter costs. Well, let's see what ApartmentGuide.com says in their annual rent report for the month of December of 2021. Rent prices continue to trend up across the U.S. as the end of the year approaches, and let's look at where rent prices stand today. Nationwide rent prices for one-bedroom and two-bedroom apartments have increased significantly year over year at 21.3% and 16.7% respectively. That is a far cry from the 3.8% that our benevolent government overlords are giving us. And I just want to scroll down a little bit here and take a look at this map, folks. This is showing year over year percent change in rents. And you can see every state in the country has a rent increase, except for Nebraska, with a 2% year over year decline. Makes you wonder what's going on in Nebraska that the rent has gone down. Any folks from Nebraska out there watching? You want to fill us in on that? That's interesting. But look over here, Oregon, year over year, 58.8% change. South Dakota, 45.04%. Delaware, 50.6%. So folks, rents across the U.S. have increased dramatically year over year. And the numbers the CPI gives us, 3.8%. As the great Mark Twain once said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Owner's equivalent rent. All right, so that was a lot of data in a short video. Long story short, we've got food prices actually ticked down a little bit in December, so less of an input there. Energy prices down significantly for the month of December. So at least for this report, we're going to see a much lower energy index, although by next month, that change will be wiped out because prices have gone back up. New cars actually came down a little bit despite the deceiving headlines. Used cars continue to go higher. And of course, rent way higher. Will the government finally decide to tell the truth about the rent? That's anybody's guess. So far, they have been feeding us total, utter, complete BS in owner's equivalent rent in the CPI numbers. And all of those numbers need to be taken with a grain of salt, because in January, they are going to be calculating the weightings based on our 2019 and our 2020 expenditures. In 2020, threw everything way out of whack. Household budgets were way different than they've been in past years. And if you want my guess, that change is going to juke those numbers down. Because historically speaking, every time the government changes the way they measure CPI, the index goes down. So what do you guys think CPI is going to come in at? Let me know down in the comments below. Give me your best guess and why you think it's going to be that way. And whoever gets the closest, I will award the winner 1 million Melonhead points, which are worth absolutely nothing but bragging rights, of course. And just one more reminder that I will be live streaming the CPI release tomorrow starting at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join me and we can look at those numbers live as they come out together. Folks, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching that video. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. And until next time, live small and dream big.